Well, welcome to the show. We are celebrating David Bowie's 65th birthday today, so I'll hand you straight over to the gentleman himself.
I never knew really if I wanted to be a short story writer. A singer really was the last thing I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to write words down in some kind of either poem form or prose form, and I wrote them as little stories, and it seemed quite easy to set them to music. So they became songs. I guess if I hadn't had any sort of musical inspiration of any kind, I would have been a writer. I was a straight writer. I would have written novels, I think.
So welcome to the show where we're celebrating all things David Bowie. So we kicked you off with an interview there about him talking about his singing rather than the writing of songs, which he obviously went on to do, and a song When I'm Five, which is one of his earliest works. I didn't want to play the Laughing Gnome. I thought maybe it would be a bit too early for that. We've got more David Bowie later, and Pete Doggett is going to be coming in to talk about his book, The Man Who Sold the World, where he takes each song by song, and he's talking about the chords in the songs and how it works, so that should be fairly interesting. That's sometime after 11 o'clock. But today we are celebrating David Bowie's 65th birthday. I hope he doesn't mind. It's all over the BBC, isn't it? He's 65 today. And we got this text from Fat Ant in Norwich saying, "Happy birthday, David Bowie. I've seen Bowie 107 times since 1972, and that's no lie. The man is a genius." And let's go back to David Bowie and have another clip from his interview archive.
I got most of the look together for Ziggy, and what it was basically is that a Kubrick film, it was Clockwork Orange, and the jumpsuits in that I thought were just wonderful, and I liked the malicious kind of malevolent, vicious quality of those four guys, although it wasn't, aspects of violence themselves didn't turn me on particularly, and so I wanted to put another spin on that, so I went to Liberty's or places like that in London. Probably more of a schmatter shop off Tottenham Court Road is more like it, but Liberty's sounds better. And I picked out all these very florid, bright, quilted kind of materials, and so that took the edge off the violent look of the suits, but still retained that kind of terrorist, we're ready for action kind of look. And the wrestling boots I think we had with laces on, but I changed the colour, made them greens and blues and stuff like that. So that was the basic look, and but instead of just having one eyelash, I went the whole hog and we had two eyelashes. But even the inset photographs in the inside sleeve of Ziggy owed a lot to the Malcolm McDowell look.
Coming up now, Pete Doggett is here in the studio. We will be talking all things David Bowie. He's got a book that came out last September. It's called The Man Who Sold the World. So let's celebrate the man's birthday, 65 today. Happy birthday, David Bowie.
I'm down, Benjamin.
Brilliant. David Bowie there, Suffragette City. And welcome to the studio, Mr. Peter Doggett, who's written the book, The Man Who Sold the World. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thanks very much, Cerys. Good to be here.
Yeah, you're a very busy man at the moment, I guess.
I seem to be going from studio to studio this morning talking about David Bowie, which is a pleasure, always a pleasure.
Fresh from the World Service Studio.
Yes, that's right.
Six Music, the hub of music here on the BBC, hopefully, anyway. So I can say you've got this book. It came out at the end of last year, so perfect timing. It's called The Man Who Sold the World, and it's David Bowie and the 1970s. I'm going to start off reading a little extract, because what's striking about it is that you write as if you can get insight into David Bowie's brain, as if you are David Bowie. So let me give you an example of this. He was working in a studio run by black entrepreneurs with mostly black musicians on music that was inspired by the sound of black America. As a kid, that had been the most seductive part of the myth, before he knew what it meant to be black in this land. Now, after the official end of segregation and the supposed death of discrimination, what was black America America the youngest America of them all? Was it the high, quasi-feminine voice of a sweet soul band, or the pimp and hustler stereotypes that peopled the so-called blaxploitation movies? What did it mean to process your hair or shape it into an afro using afro sheen and so forth? It's a fantastic book because you really do try and enter David Bowie's head. How do you do that?
Well, with songs as rich and as deep as his, it's, as I said already, it's a pleasure. And in a way, if you study the music, it is actually quite easy. I mean, there's been so many books written about Bowie, and they always talk about, sex, drugs, rock and roll, the same old sort of anecdotes. And the work tends to get forgotten. I mean, everybody recognises how brilliant, how influential it was, but the sheer genius of the words and the music and the way he sort of intuitively put them together is forgotten. So I soaked myself in this stuff. What a joy to have to sit with headphones on and listen to these songs over and over and try and work out, where was David Bowie in the world? Where was he at psychologically? What was he listening to? What was he reading? What were all the influences? And then try and as best I could, sort of, as you say, get inside his head and work out what was going on.
Because you say Bowie's incredibly honest in his work. Now, I'm a huge fan of David Bowie and have been, especially in adolescence, from 13 onwards, just as you say, immerse yourself in his work. But sometimes it can be quite abstract. And I heard, maybe it's an urban myth, I don't know. Is it a fact or is it made up, that he used to write his lyrics on scraps of paper, then muddle them up and then produce the song out of them?
He certainly did around the sort of Diamond Dogs period, and then again in the late 70s, and then again in the 90s he tried it. It wasn't all the way through the 70s like that, but it was a technique that he experimented with. He was always trying to unlock his creativity, and I think what's remarkable about Bowie in the 70s is that he managed to keep finding new ways of kick-starting himself, of getting himself energized, and of reaching new bits of his brain. And I really can't think of anybody in rock history who's managed to be that sort of open to his own imagination and inspiration for so long.
Because he was an artist, wasn't he? Because we played a clip earlier on where he was a reluctant singer.
His first musical experience was playing saxophone in a sort of dance band in youth clubs in South London when he was about 15, and I think pretty early on he realised he liked the attention. I'm sure he liked getting the girls, and I'll get more attention if I sing. But it wasn't his obvious route. He wanted to be creative. I don't think he was creative at school. He left with almost no qualifications and went out into the world and thought, the stuff I'm not expressing. And so the rest of his career has really been about, how can I get what's inside me out? And he was really good at doing it.
Well, we'll play another clip of David Bowie talking, this time on art and painting. And then we'll play The Young Americans, which is what the extract I read out was about, that song. So let's hear David Bowie.
One painting isn't the painter's life. And often a painter will do lots of paintings and he's only satisfied with a couple in his entire career. And I think that applies to me definitely, is that I'm only happy with a couple of albums. I think occasionally I'll strike something that's very good. But you can't set out and do a painting and say, well, this is it, and it is it. You just hope and you try, and if it doesn't work out, you put it to one side and do another one. I think that's an important thing to remember about a lot of British rock albums, is that it doesn't matter if they're not all good. They can't be all good, because there's only one that's going to come up every 10 albums or so that's going to be actually meaningful.
David Bowie's Young Americans there. I'm joined by Peter Doggett here in the studio talking about the book, The Man Who Sold the World. Now let's go back to the book. It treats every album separately and then goes through the songs track by track in quite detail. I'll give you an example. Changes, for instance, in which the opening chords were repeated in reverse over the final bars, so that after several minutes of constant mutation, the pianist's hands began exactly where they had started, tracing the symmetrical shape of C major 7th chord with 4 fingers equally spaced along the keys. That's a lot of detail.
I don't go into that much detail for every song, but it was just something that struck me. I'm not as good a piano player as David Bowie was, even when he started out. But I did actually sit down at the piano and think, how does this song work? Because it's got that descending thing that we know from the what was it, Hamlet's cigar ad, Air on a G string, that sort of bass going down. And I thought, okay, he's not really a pianist. How can he do that? It sounds really complicated. And then I sat there at the keyboard and thought, oh, he just moved one finger. And then suddenly I thought, I woke up and went, oh, that's how he did it. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know it was a C major seventh, but he felt his way through. And then it obviously just made sense for him to end up back at the same point again. Yeah. And I thought, isn't that interesting? He's writing a song called Changes, and it ends where it started.
With no change.
Yeah.
And you say also in the book, he started out, he had a brief stint as an ad man.
Yeah. Which he was always very dismissive of, and all the other biographies say, oh, he did this job. But I thought, look, you're 16 years old and you're working in Bond Street at an advertising agency in the 60s, and at night you're in a rock and roll band. I mean, this is the most exciting thing any 16-year-old could imagine. And so I tried to think to myself, what was it like? Even if he wasn't actually doing any work, and one gets the impression he was usually sketching designs for his own stage costumes rather than actually doing the photocopying and whatever he was supposed to be doing. What an impact that must have had to see advertising campaigns being born. And then again, it was another light bulb moment. I thought, this is what he's been doing ever since. Yeah. And in the 70s, he realizes, oh, I can become a brand. I can become Ziggy Stardust. That will be the brand for that album. And so he was able to draw on that experience and use it for the rest of his career.
Because you say also in the book he wasn't quite at home with the whimsical sort of bubblegum pop of the 60s, and so he really came to the fore in the 70s. He and George Harrison, strange partners, if you like. They were the two guys who through the 60s were saying, we don't really buy all this peace and love, this optimism, we don't understand it. And I think in Bowie's case it helped that he was trying to be successful and it wasn't getting anywhere. That would make you more cynical, I think. But it meant that when the 70s began and suddenly the optimism had gone, the idealism had gone, he was in the perfect place for apocalypse, doom, gloom, depression, and all the things that we remember so fondly from the 70s. Have you interviewed David Bowie a lot?
I haven't, not at all, no. He's effectively retired for the last 5 or 6 years. He doesn't give even email interviews anymore, so that avenue was closed to me. I've read pretty much every interview he's ever given, and what strikes you is that he would have been, I don't know about now, but in the 70s particularly, he would have been quite capable of coming in, doing your show, giving you the world's most fantastic interview, telling you the reasons behind songs and albums, and then going next door into the next studio and giving another brilliant interview with entirely different explanations for everything. So when I say you can't trust him, I don't mean he's duplicitous or devious. He's just a great storyteller, and he would believe what he was telling you, and then he would go and tell somebody else the exact opposite, and he would believe that as well. And everybody who heard each version of the story would think, but that's the real version. And so you have to sort of fight your way through his interviews almost to get to what was really going on.
Any more surprising things that came to light?
Just the incredible way in which he assimilated new influences. He was almost like a magpie in the best possible sense of the word. I mean, he'd left school with, I say, no qualifications pretty much. And a lot of people could have shut down at that point and thought, I'm not interested. Instead of which, every day he woke up going, there's the world out there. I want to learn stuff. I want to read new things. I want to hear new things. So every day was new exciting discoveries for him. And then he channeled all those into his work.
Well, shall we have a little listen to a clip? He's talking about his spirituality. We mentioned George Harrison there. Let's listen to this.
Ever since I was a kid, I'd been into exploring my spiritual side of life. It's very important to me and always has been. It's almost as though if I could solve the key to my spiritual life, then everything else would fall into place. That's what I always felt when I was younger. This time, an unfortunate confluence of situations was a fast dawning interest in the Kabbalah and magic and drug taking. It's a lethal combination. And I got very drawn into the writings of people like Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, and some of the more esoteric magicians. Not, I might add, Crowley, who always crops up. I have used him in early songs on Hunky Dory. In fact, I cited him. I used him because he was such an obvious symbol. It's an inbuilt icon. There are a number of others that I was much more into. That plus the Blavatsky ideas on the esoteric and ancient and secret rites of the Tibetan Buddhists sort of stuck me in a netherworld that was unholy, and I demonized myself, I think, during that period, and created many psychic wounds, which I think took me many years to heal.
Oh yeah,
Changes by David Bowie. We are celebrating his birthday. He turned 65 today, so happy birthday. It's just when you play these tracks, if you gelled with him during adolescence, which I did, it just totally takes you back to those raw emotions of adolescence, and it's like almost makes you sad listening to it, because he was so like crazy all over the shop, you know, wanting to change the world, and all those lyrics just speak to you, and that Peter was agreeing, weren't you?
Very much so, and I was saying to you off air that the reason is that he was so emotionally open when he was making the records, that's why everybody else connected with them so much, because he'd opened up everything and just said, "This is me, you know, come and get me."
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I'm gonna confess now, at the age of about 15, planning to run away to Switzerland, where he was living at the time. So, David, it's me.
Here I am at last. You've been waiting for me.
You know, the music speaks to you so much. So, you know, lived Ziggy Stardust and the Hunky Dory and Aladdin Sane. And so, you know, what are your favourite albums?
Oh, from the 70s, a strange one in a way. Diamond Dogs has always really spoken to me. Yeah. I mean, I love Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane, and we've been talking about Changes. Hunky Dory, what an incredible album. It's like the great album that the Beatles never made, Hunky Dory. It's
Show your work on the fire.
Yeah.
I love that line.
But there's something about Diamond Dogs, and then the soul period as well, Young Americans and Station to Station. I mean, it's really difficult. It's a different choice every day almost. Was it fun to write, or was it difficult because of these changes? It was fantastic fun. I mean, just it was like wallowing in ecstasy, and I don't mean the drug, I mean the feeling. Because to be able to immerse yourself in such rich work. And the amazing thing, as I said earlier, I mean, the amount he achieved by himself, that's the thing. You look at the Beatles in the 60s and go, wow, what an incredible career. But there were four of them bouncing off each other. Basically, okay, he had lots of helpers, but he was doing this by himself. And what an incredible tightrope walk it was for him throughout that decade. And when you listen to the early albums, because I even love the earlier, more whimsical ones. Yeah. And, you know, it's just his songwriting and his imagination that really comes through. Yeah, the imagination, that's the key word for him, really. Well, thank you, Peter Doggett. I know you're busy. You're going to be going around celebrating David Bowie, and we appreciate that you spent your time with us this morning. Thank you very much. Cerys says, Robert Jennings, I want to say happy birthday to David Bowie. Seen him numerous times. The best was in 76 at Wembley. The Thin White Duke tour touched his limo after the show. I was only 16. Thank you very much to Rob in Jersey for that. I've got a brilliant one that came in here today. David Bowie slept on our sofa. A couple of years back, we bought a vintage 60s sofa from eBay, and when we collected it, the owner told us it had belonged to her parents. And in the 60s, when she was just 15, she was going out with Davy Jones, and he was then, I think she said he was 18 at the time. They went to see Thelonious Monk. See, jazz. They went to see a Thelonious Monk gig one night and got back too late for Davy to get the last bus home, so he slept on the sofa. It really needs recovering now, but we can't quite bring ourselves to do it, as it still has the essence of Bowie. Thank you very much for that story. Brilliant. Now imagine David Bowie going to see Thelonious Monk. That would be a dream date, eh? Got a couple more songs to play you. Oh, but first of all, another archive clip.
It was my statement of what Mott the Hoople were about. That was always my problem, is that when I took an artist in a studio, I would inflict my definition of the artist on the artist. And that's why I stepped out of producing people for a bit, because I realised that in a way I was corrupting what they were trying to do. I did that with Mott. I mean, it might have helped them commercially and all that, but it was not the Mott the Hoople that Mott the Hoople thought they were. And again, having created an identity, sort of my identity of what they were all about, they were stuck with a dilemma about, well, we can't quite understand what we are anymore.
My question to you this morning is, what music have you come across during the Christmas break? I've got Sybil Forster in Norwich has got in touch. Thank you, Sybil. I was given a vinyl copy of the George Benson cookbook. It is seasoned with jazzy musical aromas. That sounds lovely. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, John.